I have spent 20 years trying to forget the smell of smoke, and 20 years failing. It clings to my memory the way it once clung to my hair, my skin, the fabric of the only dress I owned, and some nights, when the fire in my own hearth crackles too loudly, I am there again, standing in the snow with nothing but a trembling dog in my arms, watching everything I knew turn to ash and ember. My name is Beatrice Wren, and this is the story of how I lost everything in a single night, only to discover that I had never truly possessed anything worth keeping, and how from the ruins of that burning manor I found a love I never dared to imagine and a life I never believed I deserved. I came to Ashworth Manor when I was 22 years old, a woman already hardened by loss and hunger and the particular cruelty that the world reserves for those born without fortune or family. My mother had died of fever when I was 19, and my father, a blacksmith with gentle hands and a gentler heart, had followed her within the year, his grief consuming him more thoroughly than any illness could have managed. I was left alone in a village that had no use for an unmarried woman with no dowry and no prospects, and so I did what countless women before me had done. I sought employment in service, hoping only for a roof over my head and bread enough to survive. Ashworth Manor was not my first position, but it became my longest. The estate sprawled across the Hampshire countryside like a sleeping giant, its gray stone walls rising from manicured gardens that seemed to stretch toward the horizon. I remember the first time I saw it, stepping down from the wagon that had carried me from the village, my single trunk containing everything I owned in the world. The manor house itself seemed to watch me approach, its dozens of windows glinting in the autumn sun like suspicious eyes. I was hired as a kitchen maid, the lowest of the low, tasked with scrubbing pots and peeling vegetables and hauling water from dawn until well past dark. The work was brutal, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, ran her domain with an iron fist and a tongue sharp enough to draw blood. But I did not complain. I had learned long ago that complaint was a luxury afforded only to those who had options, and I had none. The Duke of Ashworth was a man I rarely saw in those early years. He existed in a realm far above the kitchens and sculleries where I spent my days, appearing only as a distant figure, glimpsed through windows or spoken of in hushed, reverent tones by the other servants. His name was Richard Ashworth, and he was said to be one of the wealthiest men in England. His fortune built on coal mines and shipping concerns and investments that none of us truly understood. He was 40 years old when I arrived, a man of imposing height and cold features, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a mouth that seemed incapable of forming a smile. He had been married once. I learned from the whispered gossip that flowed through the servants' quarters like water through a millstream. His wife, a woman named Charlotte, had died in childbirth some 15 years before my arrival, and the child had not survived either. Since then, the Duke had lived alone in his vast manor, attended by a small army of servants, but intimate with none of them. He was not cruel precisely, but neither was he kind. He was simply absent, as if some essential part of him had departed with his wife and never returned. I worked my way up through the household over the years, graduating from kitchen maid to housemaid to parlor maid, each promotion bringing me slightly closer to the light and air of the upper floors and slightly further from the steaming drudgery of the kitchens below. By the time I was 30, I had become something of a fixture at Ashworth Manor, one of those servants who had been there so long that it seemed impossible to imagine the house without them. It was around this time that I first encountered the dog. His name was Wellington, a name that seemed almost absurdly grand for a creature so old and battered. He was a hunting hound of some kind, though his hunting days were long behind him. His muzzle had gone gray, his joints were stiff with age, and one of his ears had been torn in some long-forgotten adventure, leaving it flopped at an odd angle that gave him a perpetually quizzical expression. He had been the Duke's companion for over a decade, I learned, the last gift from the late Duchess before her death. Wellington was not supposed to be in the servants' areas of the house. The Duke kept him in the library or the study or his private chambers, places where the likes of me were permitted only when cleaning was required. But dogs, unlike their masters, do not recognize the boundaries of class and station, and Wellington had a habit of wandering where he pleased, his old nose leading him on explorations that frequently ended in the kitchens, where cook would slip him scraps of meat and bones to gnaw. I found him there one evening, lying by the fire with his great gray head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed in contentment. I had come down for a cup of tea after finishing my duties for the night, seeking a moment of warmth and quiet before retiring to my cold little room in the attic. The kitchen was empty, cook having long since gone to bed, and I was surprised to find I was not alone. Wellington lifted his head as I entered, his tail giving a single tentative wag. I had seen him before, of course, glimpsed him trailing after the Duke or lying in patches of sunlight in the corridors. But I had never been alone with him, never had occasion to do more than step carefully around him as I went about my work. I should have shooed him back to the upper floors, should have worried about what would happen if the Duke discovered his dog consorting with the servants. But there was something in the animal's eyes that stopped me, a loneliness that I recognized because I carried its twin in my own heart. I sat down on the floor beside him, heedless of my clean uniform, and let him rest his heavy head on my knee. He sighed, a deep and contented sound, and I felt something within me crack open, some wall I had built long ago to protect myself from the pain of attachment. That night began a secret friendship that would span 2 years. Wellington, I discovered, was a creature of habit, and his habits now included visiting the kitchen each evening when the house grew quiet, seeking out the woman who sat with him by the fire and spoke to him in soft tones and did not seem to care that he was old and slow and no longer useful for the purposes for which he had been bred. I told him things I had never told another soul. I told him about my mother's laugh, which had sounded like bells, and my father's hands, which had been so strong and yet so gentle when they touched my hair. I told him about the boy I had loved when I was 17, a farmer's son with kind eyes who had married another girl with a larger dowry and broken my heart so thoroughly I had never dared to love again. I told him about my fears and my dreams and the secret wishes I harbored in the deepest chambers of my heart, wishes I could not even fully articulate to myself. Wellington listened to it all, his warm brown eyes never judging, his presence a comfort I had not known I needed until I had it. He became my confidant, my friend, the only creature in that vast and lonely house who seemed to see me as something more than a pair of hands to scrub floors and polish silver. The Duke, of course, knew nothing of our friendship. He barely knew I existed, his eyes passing over me the way they passed over all the servants, seeing the uniform rather than the person wearing it. I was furniture to him, useful and necessary but hardly worthy of notice. I did not resent him for this. It was simply the way of the world, the natural order of things that I had accepted long before I ever set foot in Ashworth Manor. But sometimes, when I was sitting with Wellington by the kitchen fire, I would wonder what it would be like to be seen, to be known, to have someone look at me and recognize the person looking back. I did not know then that I would soon have my answer, and that the answer would come wrapped in flames. The night of the fire began like any other winter night at Ashworth Manor. December had wrapped the countryside in a blanket of snow, and the household was bustling with preparations for the Christmas festivities that would soon be upon us. The Duke was expecting guests, a rare occurrence that had sent the entire staff into a frenzy of cleaning and cooking and general preparation. I had spent the day polishing silver until my fingers ached, my reflection distorted in the gleaming surfaces of spoons and serving dishes that would grace tables I would never sit at, holding food I would never taste. By the time evening fell, I was exhausted, my back aching and my eyes stinging from the concentration required for such detailed work. I took my supper in the servants' hall, a thin soup and coarse bread that tasted like heaven after the long day's labor, and then made my way to the kitchen for my nightly vigil with Wellington. He was there already, as I had known he would be, his tail wagging weakly at my approach, his old body too tired for more enthusiastic greeting. I settled beside him on the stone floor, still warm from the day's cooking fires, and let the peace of the moment wash over me. The kitchen was quiet, the great iron stoves banked for the night, their gentle heat radiating outward like a blessing. Outside, I could hear the wind howling around the corners of the manor, rattling the windows and sending drafts creeping through every crack and crevice. But here, with Wellington's head heavy on my lap and the embers glowing softly in the hearth, I felt something almost like contentment. I must have dozed, for the next thing I knew, Wellington was on his feet, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his throat. I blinked, disoriented, unsure how long I had been asleep, and then I smelled it. Smoke. Not the friendly smoke of a cooking fire or a warming hearth, but something sharper, more acrid, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of destruction. I scrambled to my feet, my heart suddenly pounding, and that was when I heard the screaming. It came from above, from the upper floors where the family and guests would be sleeping. A sound of pure terror that cut through the howling wind like a knife. And then I heard another sound, one that turned my blood to ice. The roar of flames. I ran. I do not remember deciding to run, do not remember choosing the stairs that led up from the kitchen to the main floors of the house. My body simply moved, propelled by instinct and fear. Wellington forgotten behind me as I burst through the door into the corridor above. The scene that greeted me was one I will never forget, not if I live to be 100 years old. The east wing of Ashworth Manor was ablaze. Flames licked up the walls and danced across the ceiling, their orange light casting everything in hellish relief. Smoke billowed through the corridors, thick and choking, reducing visibility to mere feet. And everywhere there were people, servants in their nightclothes, guests I did not recognize, all of them running and screaming and pushing toward the doors that led to safety. I was swept up in the tide of bodies, carried along by the sheer force of the panicked crowd. Someone's elbow caught me in the ribs, someone else stepped on my foot, and I tasted blood where I had bitten my tongue. But I kept moving, kept fighting toward the door, because the alternative was to stop, and to stop was to die. I burst out into the night, gasping and coughing, the cold air hitting my smoke-seared lungs like a physical blow. Snow was falling, gentle and incongruous, the white flakes hissing as they met the heat radiating from the burning manor. I stumbled forward, putting distance between myself and the inferno, and then turned to look back. Half of Ashworth Manor was on fire. The flames had consumed the entire east wing and were spreading rapidly, leaping from window to window, devouring everything in their path. The sound was tremendous, a roaring, crackling cacophony that drowned out even the screams of the people fleeing into the night. And in the orange glow of the flames, I could see figures still emerging from the building, silhouettes against the fire, running for their lives. And then I saw him. The Duke of Ashworth emerged from the manor's main entrance, but he was not running. He was walking, his pace measured, his arms wrapped around something he clutched to his chest. For a moment I thought he was carrying a person, perhaps a servant who had been overcome by smoke, perhaps a guest who had been unable to flee on their own. But as he drew closer, as the firelight illuminated his burden, I saw what he was truly holding. Gold. He was carrying a strongbox, a heavy metal container that I knew must contain the gold coins and precious gems he kept in his private safe. His face was set in a mask of determination, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if the burning manor behind him was merely an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. He passed within 10 feet of where I stood, close enough for me to see the sweat on his brow and the soot on his fine silk dressing gown. Close enough to see the way his fingers gripped the strongbox, white-knuckled with the force of his hold. Close enough to see that he did not look back, not even once, at the house that had been his family's home for generations. And in that moment, I thought of Wellington. The thought struck me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs more effectively than the smoke had done. Wellington, who was old and slow and arthritic, who could not navigate stairs without difficulty, who would have been unable to flee the chaos of the fire. Wellington, who had been in the kitchen when I had run, who I had left behind in my panic. Wellington, who was still inside. I looked at the Duke, standing there in the snow with his box of gold, and I looked at the burning manor, flames now visible in nearly every window, and I made a choice that would change everything. I ran back inside. I do not know what possessed me to do it. I do not know if it was bravery or foolishness, or simply the same instinct that had driven me to flee, now reversed by the thought of that gentle old dog dying alone in the flames. I only know that one moment I was standing in the snow, and the next I was running back through the manor's service entrance, plunging into the smoke and heat like a swimmer diving into a churning sea. The corridor that led to the kitchen was still passable, though barely. The flames had not yet reached this part of the house, but the smoke was thick and black, reducing the world to a few feet of hellish visibility. I dropped to my hands and knees, remembering something my father had once told me about smoke rising, and crawled forward, my lungs burning, my eyes streaming tears. The kitchen door was still closed, thank God. I pushed it open and tumbled through, gasping for air that was only marginally cleaner than what I had left behind. And there, pressed against the far wall, his body trembling, his eyes white with fear, was Wellington. He whimpered when he saw me, a sound so pitiful it broke my heart. I crawled to him, wrapped my arms around his massive body, and for a moment just held him, feeling his racing heart against my chest, his hot breath against my neck. And then I realized I had no idea how to get us out. The way I had come was already filling with smoke, the flames visible now at the far end of the corridor. The kitchen had a door that led outside, but it was on the other side of the room, and between me and it were the great iron stoves still radiating heat, and a maze of tables and preparation surfaces that would slow me down, cost me precious seconds I did not have. I had come to save Wellington, and now it seemed we would both die. But then, through the smoke and the fear and the certainty of death, I heard a voice. Help me with the door. I did not recognize the voice. It was a man's voice, deep and commanding, and it came from the direction of the outside door. I looked up, squinting through the smoke, and saw a figure there, a tall silhouette framed by the gray light of the snowy night beyond. Now, the voice said, and I found myself obeying without thought, dragging Wellington across the kitchen floor, my muscles screaming in protest, my lungs fighting for every breath. The figure met me halfway, taking Wellington's weight from my arms, and together we stumbled toward the door, toward the cold and the snow and the blessed, blessed air. We burst out into the night, and I fell to my knees in the snow, coughing so hard I thought I might turn myself inside out. Wellington collapsed beside me, his body heaving, but alive. Alive. We were both alive. It was only then, when I could finally breathe again, when the roaring in my ears had subsided enough for me to hear the sounds of the night, that I looked up to see who had saved us. He was tall, as I had thought, with dark hair turned silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to hold within them all the colors of a storm-tossed sea. He was dressed in a heavy coat, thrown hastily over what appeared to be nightclothes, his feet bare in the snow, despite the bitter cold. And he was looking at me with an expression I could not name, an expression that held within it shock and admiration, and something else, something deeper that I did not have the words to describe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was the same voice that had called to me through the smoke, though now it was softer, gentler, filled with a concern that seemed entirely genuine. I shook my head, unable to speak, still coughing, still trying to clear the smoke from my lungs. He knelt beside me in the snow, heedless of the cold, and placed a hand on my back, steadying me as the coughs racked my body. "Easy," he said. "Easy. Breathe slowly. You are safe now." I do not know how long we stayed there, kneeling in the snow while Ashworth Manor burned behind us. It might have been minutes or hours, the time distorted by shock and smoke and the strange unreality of the moment. But eventually, my coughing subsided, and I was able to look up again at the man who had saved me. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice raw and ragged. He smiled, a small and tired smile that nonetheless transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "My name is Sebastian Hartwell," he said. "I am the Earl of Thornwood. And I find myself in the rather remarkable position of having witnessed the bravest thing I have ever seen in my life." I did not know what to say to that. I did not feel brave. I felt foolish and scared and cold, my body shaking as much from shock as from the winter air. But before I could find words, before I could do anything at all, there was a commotion from the direction of the manor's front entrance. "The dog," someone was shouting. "The Duke's dog. Has anyone seen the dog?" And then another voice, one I recognized as belonging to the Duke himself, Wellington. "Wellington, where are you?" Lord Sebastian helped me to my feet, and together we made our way around the side of the manor, Wellington limping heavily but alive at our heels. The scene at the front of the house was chaos. Servants and guests huddled in groups, some weeping, some simply staring at the burning building with blank expressions of shock. Fire brigade wagons were arriving from the village, though it was clear they would be too late to save anything but the West Wing, which had thus far escaped the flames. And in the center of it all stood the Duke of Ashworth, still clutching his strongbox of gold, his face illuminated by the hellish glow of his burning home. He was calling for Wellington, his voice carrying an edge of panic that seemed almost absurd, coming from a man who had just walked calmly out of an inferno while holding his treasure. He turned as we approached, and his eyes fell first on Wellington, then on me, and finally on Lord Sebastian, who still had one hand on my arm, steadying me as I walked. I saw something flicker in the Duke's expression, something that might have been relief or might have been something else entirely, something darker and more complex. "You," he said, his eyes fixed on me. "You went back in. For the dog." It was not a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes," I said. "I could not leave him to die." The Duke stared at me for a long moment, and in that moment, I saw him truly look at me for the first time in all the years I had served in his household. He saw me, Beatrice Wren, not a servant, not a pair of hands to scrub his floors, but a woman, a person, a human being who had risked her life to save something he loved. And then the moment passed, and his expression closed again, and he turned away to deal with the fire brigade, and I was once again invisible. But I had been seen. For just that one moment, I had been seen. And something in me had shifted, had changed in a way that could never be unchanged. The fire burned through the night and into the morning. By the time dawn broke, gray and cold over the snow-covered countryside, half of Ashworth Manor was nothing but a smoking ruin. The east wing, where the fire had started, was completely destroyed, along with the entire second floor and most of the roof. The west wing had been saved, more by luck than by the efforts of the fire brigade, but it was badly damaged by smoke and water and would require extensive repairs before it could be habited again. The Duke moved into the Thornwood estate, accepting the hospitality of Lord Sebastian with a reluctance that was almost palpable. The servants were dispersed to various locations, some to the village inn, some to the homes of tenant farmers who had room to spare, some to other great houses in the area that had offered temporary assistance. I was among the latter group, assigned to help in the kitchens of Thornwood Hall until Ashworth Manor could be rebuilt. I did not expect to see Lord Sebastian again. He was an earl, a man of wealth and title and power, and I was a kitchen maid, a woman of no consequence, distinguished only by the foolish act of running into a burning building to save an old dog. Our paths had crossed in a moment of crisis, and I assumed that moment was over, that we would return to our respective spheres and never speak again. I was wrong. I had been at Thornwood Hall for 3 days when I was summoned to the library. The summons came through Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper at Thornwood, a woman whose severe appearance masked a surprisingly warm heart. She found me in the scullery, elbow deep in soapy water, and informed me that Lord Sebastian wished to see me in the library at my earliest convenience. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Lord Sebastian," I repeated, "wishes to see me." "That is what I said," Mrs. Crawford replied, her tone suggesting that I should not make her repeat herself a third time. "Clean yourself up and present yourself to the library. Try not to keep his lordship waiting." I went, of course. What else could I do? I dried my hands, smoothed my hair, and made my way through the unfamiliar corridors of Thornwood Hall, my heart pounding with a combination of confusion and fear. I could think of no reason why an earl would summon a temporary kitchen maid to his library, unless it was to reprimand her for some offense she was not aware of having committed. The library at Thornwood Hall was unlike any room I had ever seen. It was vast, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines creating a tapestry of colors that seemed to glow in the light from the tall windows. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, and the air smelled of wood smoke and paper and something else. Something warm and slightly spicy that I would later come to associate with Lord Sebastian himself. He was standing by the window when I entered, his tall figure silhouetted against the gray winter light. He turned as the door opened, and when he saw me, his face broke into a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "Miss Wren," he said, "thank you for coming." I curtsied, as was proper, and kept my eyes lowered, as was also proper. "My lord," I said, "you wished to see me." "I did," he said. "I wished to inquire after your health. You took in a great deal of smoke during the fire, and I wanted to ensure you had not suffered any lasting effects." I blinked, surprised. He had summoned me to the library, the private sanctuary of the lord of the manor, to ask about my health. "I am well, my lord," I said. "Thank you for your concern." "I am glad to hear it," he said. "And Wellington? How does he fare?" The mention of Wellington's name sent a wave of warmth through me, unexpected and confusing. "The dog is well, my lord," I said. "The Duke has him in his chambers. He was frightened by the fire, but he is recovering." Lord Sebastian nodded, but he did not dismiss me, as I expected him to. Instead, he gestured to a chair by the fire. "Will you sit, Miss Wren?" "I would speak with you, if you have a moment." I hesitated. It was not proper for a servant to sit in the presence of her betters, much less in the Lord's own library. But there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made refusal seem impossible. I crossed the room and perched on the edge of the chair he had indicated. My back straight, my hands folded in my lap. Lord Sebastian took the chair across from me, and for a moment we simply sat there, the fire crackling between us, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable. And then he spoke. "I have been thinking about what I witnessed the other night," he said. "I have been thinking about it a great deal, in fact, and I find myself unable to reconcile what I saw with what I thought I knew about the world." I did not know what to say to this, so I said nothing, simply waited for him to continue. "I saw a duke," he said, "a man of wealth and privilege and power, emerge from a burning building with a box of gold in his arms. I saw him walk past servants and guests, walk past people who were crying out for help, without so much as a glance in their direction. I saw him stand in the snow and watch his ancestral home burn, and the only concern on his face was for his fortune." He paused, his eyes finding mine. "And then I saw you." I felt my cheeks flush, though whether from embarrassment or something else, I could not say. "My lord," I began. "I saw a woman," he continued, as if I had not spoken. "A woman with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back run into that inferno. Not for gold, not for treasure, not for anything of material value. For a dog. An old, arthritic dog that could not have been worth more than a few shillings to anyone who measured value in such terms." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on my face. "Why did you do it, Miss Wren? Why did you risk your life for the Duke's dog?" The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself answering honestly, perhaps for the first time in my life, speaking to a member of the aristocracy as if he were simply a person, as if the gulf between our stations did not exist. Because he was my friend, I said. Because he was kind to me when no one else was. Because in all my years at Ashworth Manor, he was the only one who ever seemed to see me as something more than a servant. I met his eyes, held his gaze without flinching. So when I realized he was still inside, when I understood that he would die if I did not go back for him, there was no choice to make. He was my friend, and you do not abandon your friends. Lord Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft with something I could not name. "And now?" he asked. "Does anyone see you now?" I looked at him, this man who had appeared in the smoke and the flames like an angel of rescue. This Earl who had knelt in the snow beside a kitchen maid and held her while she coughed. "You do," I said, and the words came out before I could stop them. "You see me. I do not know why, but you do." "I see you," he agreed, and there was a weight to the words that made my heart skip. "I have seen you from the moment you emerged from that burning building with a dog in your arms and courage in your heart. And I find that I cannot look away. It was the beginning of something, though I did not know it then. It was the first thread of a tapestry that would take months to weave, a story that would unfold slowly, carefully, against the backdrop of scandal and reconstruction and the inexorable turning of the social wheel. But in that moment, sitting by the fire in the library of Thornwood Hall, all I knew was that I was being seen. And that, for the first time in my life, I did not want to look away either. The scandal broke within a week. I do not know who first told the story, who first whispered in the right ear, or penned the right letter to the right correspondent in London. But suddenly, it seemed, everyone knew. The Duke of Ashworth had saved his gold while his manor burned. A kitchen maid had run back into the flames to save his dog. The contrast was irresistible. Here was a tale ready-made for the gossip columns and the drawing-room conversations, a story that seemed to encapsulate everything the middle classes loved to believe about the aristocracy, that they were cold, that they were selfish, that they valued their wealth above all else, including human life. The Duke of Ashworth, the whispers went, had walked past a woman who was trapped beneath a fallen beam, had stepped over her body to reach his gold. The Duke of Ashworth had locked the servants' quarters to prevent the staff from using the main staircase, had cared more about keeping them in their proper place than about their survival. The Duke of Ashworth had set the fire himself for the insurance money, and had only saved the gold that would not be covered by his policy. None of it was true, of course. I had not seen any woman trapped beneath a beam, had not heard of any locked doors, and certainly did not believe the Duke capable of arson. But truth has never been a match for a good story, and this was a very good story indeed. The Duke retreated further into himself, refusing to engage with the rumors, refusing to defend himself against the accusations that swirled around him like the smoke that still lingered in the ruins of his home. He spent his days in the guest chambers at Thornwood Hall, emerging only for meals and declining most invitations to join Lord Sebastian in the library or drawing room. Wellington, at least, was with him. I glimpsed the old dog occasionally, padding through the corridors at the Duke's heels, and each time I felt a pang of something that might have been loss. Lord Sebastian, for his part, seemed to be everywhere. He supervised the rebuilding efforts at Ashworth Manor, coordinating with architects and builders, and the endless stream of tradesmen required to restore a great house to its former glory. He managed the correspondence that flowed in from all corners of the country, offers of sympathy and assistance, and occasionally thinly veiled requests for information that might fuel the scandal further. And he found time, somehow, to seek me out each day, to sit with me in the kitchen or walk with me in the gardens, to talk to me as if I were his equal rather than his servant. I did not understand it. I did not understand why a man of his station would show such interest in a woman of mine. I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the hidden motive to reveal itself, for the moment when he would make clear what he truly wanted from me. I had lived long enough to know that men of power rarely showed kindness to women of none without expecting something in return. But the weeks passed, and the shoe did not drop. Lord Sebastian continued to treat me with a respect that bordered on reverence, listening to my opinions as if they mattered, asking my advice as if he valued it, looking at me with those storm-colored eyes as if I were something precious, something worth protecting. It was in the 3rd week of January, a month after the fire, that he first told me about his wife. We were walking in the gardens behind Thornwood Hall, the snow crunching beneath our feet, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I had protested at first, pointing out that it was not proper for me to be seen walking with the lord of the manor, but he had dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand. Propriety, he had said, is a luxury for those who have never lost someone they love. I have learned that there are things more important than what is proper. And so I had walked with him, my heart racing despite the cold, my mind churning with questions I did not know how to ask. Her name was Margaret, he said, seemingly out of nowhere, and I knew immediately who he meant. She was the daughter of a baron, beautiful and kind and full of a light that seemed to illuminate every room she entered. I loved her from the moment I saw her, and I thought that love would last forever. He paused, his eyes distant, fixed on some point in the past that I could not see. We were married for 5 years, he continued, 5 years that were the happiest of my life. And then she grew ill, a wasting sickness that the doctors could not name, and over the course of 6 months, I watched her fade away. I am sorry, I said, and the words felt inadequate, as such words always do. I am so sorry for your loss. He turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression that took my breath away. A vulnerability that seemed almost impossible in a man of his bearing. A rawness that spoke of wounds that had never fully healed. I have spent the last 7 years alone, he said. I have surrounded myself with books and duties and the endless business of running an estate. I have told myself that I am content, that I do not need companionship, that the love I had with Margaret was enough to last a lifetime. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm despite the cold, his touch sending a shock through me that was almost electric. And then I saw you, he said. I saw you running into a burning building, risking your life for a creature that showed you kindness. I saw courage and selflessness and a heart so full of love that it could not bear to let even an old dog die alone, and I realized that I had been lying to myself, that I was not content, that I had been waiting all these years for someone who would make me want to feel again. I did not know what to say. I did not know what to feel. I was a kitchen maid, a woman of no consequence, and he was an earl, a man whose world was so far removed from mine that we might as well have been different species. What he was suggesting, what he was implying, it was impossible. It was madness. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw none of the coldness I had expected, none of the calculation that I had been waiting for. I saw only warmth and hope, and a question that he was too afraid to ask aloud. "My lord," I said, and my voice trembled despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I do not understand what you want from me." "I want nothing from you, Miss Wren," he said. "I want nothing but the chance to know you, to learn who you are, not as a servant, not as a hero, but as a woman, to discover whether this feeling that has taken root in my heart is merely admiration or something more." He squeezed my hand, gentle but firm. "I know that what I am asking is unconventional. I know that the world would call me a fool, would say that I have taken leave of my senses. But I have learned in my years of grief that the world's opinion matters far less than I once believed. What matters is here, in the space between two people who have both known loss and loneliness. What matters is the possibility of connection." I should have refused. I should have pulled my hand away, curtsied, and returned to the kitchen where I belonged. I should have remembered my place, remembered the gulf between us, remembered all the reasons why what he was suggesting could never work. But I did none of those things. Instead, I looked into his storm-colored eyes, and I said the only word that seemed to matter. Yes. The months that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Lord Sebastian, true to his word, sought only to know me, to learn the woman behind the servant's uniform, to discover the person who had been hidden for so long beneath layers of duty and deference. We walked together every day, regardless of the weather, exploring the grounds of Thornwood Hall and the surrounding countryside. He showed me the places he had played as a boy, the oak tree he had fallen from at age 8, leaving a scar on his chin that he still carried. He told me about his parents, his father stern but fair, his mother gentle and loving, both dead now, lost to age and illness and the inexorable march of time. And I told him about my life, about my parents, about my village, about the years of service and sacrifice that had brought me to where I was. I told him things I had never told anyone, not even Wellington, secrets I had kept buried so deep that I had almost forgotten they existed. It was terrifying, this opening of myself to another person. It was also exhilarating, like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight, like taking a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. I had been seen before in that moment after the fire, but now I was being known, and the difference was profound. The Duke of Ashworth, meanwhile, had become something of a recluse. The scandal showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to grow with each passing week, fed by new rumors and new accusations that emerged from somewhere in the vast machinery of gossip that powered London society. He rarely left his chambers now, rarely spoke to anyone except the servants who brought his meals and Wellington, who remained steadfastly at his side. I saw him sometimes when my duties took me to the upper floors of Thornwood Hall. He was changed, diminished somehow, as if the fire had burned away not just his home, but some essential part of himself. The cold authority that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a vacancy that was almost painful to witness. I should have felt satisfaction, I suppose. He had walked past me for years without seeing me, had treated me as furniture, had cared more for his gold than for any of the people who served him. The scandal was merely the world catching up to the truth that I had always known, the truth that he was a man who valued things over people, wealth over love. But satisfaction was not what I felt. What I felt was pity, and that surprised me more than anything else that had happened since the fire. Spring came slowly to Hampshire, the snow melting in patches to reveal the brown grass beneath, the first crocuses pushing up through the frozen ground like small miracles of hope. Ashworth Manor was rising from its ruins, the new construction a skeleton of beams and scaffolding that would eventually become a home again. The Duke supervised the work from a distance, emerging from his seclusion for a few hours each day to confer with the architects and builders before retreating once more into his solitude. It was on one of these occasions, in late April, that he sought me out. I was in the garden at Thornwood Hall, tending to the roses that had been Lady Margaret's pride, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I turned, expecting to see Lord Sebastian, and found instead the Duke of Ashworth, his face pale, his eyes shadowed with something that might have been shame. "Miss Wren," he said, and his voice was different than I remembered, softer, less commanding. "Might I have a word?" I set down my pruning shears and curtsied, old habits dying hard. "Of course, Your Grace." He did not speak immediately. Instead, he stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the roses, as if they held some answer he was seeking. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "I have been thinking about the night of the fire," he said. "I have thought of little else in truth, and I find myself haunted by a question that I cannot answer." He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen there before: uncertainty, vulnerability, fear. "Why did you go back for him?" he asked. "Wellington, why did you risk your life for my dog?" I thought of all the things I could say, all the explanations I could offer. I thought of the speeches I had rehearsed in my mind, the justifications I had prepared for this very question. But in the end, I found myself telling him the truth. The same truth I had told Lord Sebastian in the library. Because he was kind to me, I said, because in all my years at Ashworth Manor, he was the only one who ever seemed to see me. Not as a servant, not as a pair of hands to do work that you did not wish to do yourself, but as a person. A human being with thoughts and feelings and a heart that could be broken. The Duke flinched, as if my words had struck him. I did not mean them as an accusation, but perhaps that was how they landed. Perhaps that was how they should land. "I was invisible to you," I continued, the words flowing now with a force I could not have stopped if I tried. I was invisible to everyone in that house, but Wellington saw me. He came to me every night, and he let me talk to him, and he listened, and he never judged. He gave me something that no one else in that house ever thought to give me: companionship, friendship, love of a kind. I met the Duke's eyes, held his gaze without flinching, so when I realized he was still inside, when I understood that he would die if I did not go back for him, there was no choice to make. He was my friend, and you do not abandon your friends. The Duke was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with an emotion I could not name. "I did not know," he said. "I did not know that you and Wellington. I did not know." "Of course you did not," I said. "You never looked. You never thought to look. We were servants, Your Grace. We were the invisible people who kept your house running and your meals prepared and your clothes clean. You did not need to know us. You only needed us to work." He bowed his head, and I saw something I never thought I would see. The Duke of Ashworth, humbled, ashamed. "You are right," he said. "You are right, and I am sorry. I am sorry for not seeing you. I am sorry for not seeing any of you. I am sorry for walking out of that fire with my gold in my arms while you, a woman I had never bothered to notice, risked your life for a creature I loved." He looked up at me, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have lost everything, Miss Wren. My home, my reputation, my standing in society. And I find, to my profound surprise, that I do not care about any of it. What I care about, what I find I cannot stop thinking about, is that I nearly let Wellington die. I nearly let you die. And all because I was so focused on my gold that I forgot what truly mattered." He reached out and took my hand, and the gesture was so unexpected that I did not think to pull away. "I cannot undo what I have done," he said. "I cannot go back and make different choices, cannot rewrite the past to make myself a better man. But I can do this. I can thank you. I can thank you for saving Wellington, for loving him when I was too blind to see that he needed love, for risking your life for a creature that I, his supposed master, abandoned." He released my hand and stepped back, his composure returning, though something in his eyes had changed. Some wall had come down that would not easily be rebuilt. "I am going abroad," he said. "When the manor is completed, I will not return to it. I am giving the estate to a distant cousin, a man with a family who will fill those halls with life and laughter and all the things that I could never provide." He paused, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Wellington, of course, will stay here. With you, if you will have him. Lord Sebastian has told me of your friendship. He has told me that you are the one who should have him, the one who has earned him, and I find I cannot disagree." I stared at him, unable to speak. He was giving me Wellington. The Duke of Ashworth, a man who had valued his gold above all else, was giving away the last living connection to his dead wife, the dog who had been his only companion for over a decade. "Your Grace," I managed, "I cannot accept." "You can," he said, "and you will. It is the least I can do, Miss Wren. It is the very least." He turned to go, then stopped, looking back at me over his shoulder. "Lord Sebastian is a good man," he said. "He is the best man I know, in fact. And I have seen the way he looks at you. I have seen the way you look at him. Do not let the world tell you that such love is impossible. Do not let anyone convince you that you are not worthy of happiness." He smiled, a real smile this time, though it was tinged with sadness. "You saved my dog, Miss Wren. Perhaps in some small way you have saved me as well." And then he was gone, walking back toward the house, leaving me alone in the rose garden with the spring sun warm on my face and a feeling in my chest that I could not name. The Duke of Ashworth departed for the continent 2 weeks later, slipping away in the grey light of dawn with only a single trunk and a manservant to attend him. He left behind the scandal that had destroyed his reputation, the manor that was rising from its ashes, and Wellington, who came to me with his grey muzzle and his torn ear and his eyes full of a love that asked for nothing in return. I cried when I took him, held him close, and wept into his fur and whispered promises that I intended to keep. I would care for him. I would love him. I would give him the life he deserved, the life he had always deserved, for however many years he had left. Lord Sebastian found me there, in the garden with Wellington in my arms, my face wet with tears. He did not speak, did not ask what had happened. He simply sat down beside me on the cold ground, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, and held me while I cried. It was in that moment, I think, that I knew. I knew that I loved him, this man who had seen me from the very beginning, who had treated me with kindness and respect when he had no reason to do so, who had opened his heart to me and asked only that I open mine in return. I knew that I loved him, and the knowledge terrified me. Because love, I had learned, was dangerous. Love made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you dependent on another person for your happiness. Love could be taken away, could be lost, could be destroyed by illness or accident or the simple passage of time. My parents had loved each other, and my father had been destroyed by my mother's death. The Duke had loved his wife, and her loss had turned him into a shell of a man. Lord Sebastian had loved Lady Margaret, and his grief had consumed 7 years of his life. To love was to invite pain, and I had experienced enough pain in my life to last a lifetime. But as I sat there in the garden, with Wellington's warm body pressed against mine and Lord Sebastian's arm around my shoulders, I realized something else. I realized that I had been afraid for so long, had built such high walls around my heart, that I had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. I realized that the loneliness I had accepted as my lot in life was not inevitable, was not the price I had to pay for safety. I realized that the connection I felt with Lord Sebastian, the understanding that seemed to flow between us without words, was worth the risk of loss. I realized that I wanted to love him, and more than that, I wanted to let myself be loved. "Lord Sebastian," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected, "there is something I must tell you." He looked at me, his storm-colored eyes patient, waiting. "I am afraid," I said. "I am afraid of what I feel for you. I am afraid that it is too big, too powerful, too much. I am afraid that if I let myself love you, truly love you, the loss of you will destroy me." He did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached up and touched my face, his fingers gentle against my tear-stained cheek. "I am afraid too," he said. "I have been afraid since the day I first saw you. Afraid that I was imagining this connection between us. Afraid that you would reject me. Afraid that I would love again and lose again, and be left with nothing but the ashes of a heart that had already been burned once before." He leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my face. "But I have learned," he said, "that fear is a poor reason to avoid joy. I have learned that the possibility of loss does not diminish the value of love, but rather enhances it. Every moment we have together is precious precisely because it is finite, Every smile, every touch, every word spoken in quiet intimacy, these are the things that matter. Not the fear of what might come, but the gratitude for what is. He pulled back and looked at me, his eyes full of an emotion that took my breath away. "I love you, Beatrice Wren," he said. "I love you, and I am terrified, and I do not care. Because the alternative is to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been, and that is a fear I cannot face." I looked at him, this man who had appeared in my life like a gift I had never asked for, who had seen me when I had been invisible for so long, who had shown me that I was worthy of love and respect and happiness. And I said the only thing I could say, the only thing that mattered. "I love you too," I said, "and I am ready to be afraid together." The weeks that followed our declaration of love were a delicate dance of propriety and passion, of stolen moments and careful planning. Sebastian, ever mindful of the precarious position we found ourselves in, insisted that we proceed with caution. He was an earl, a man of considerable standing in society, and I was a kitchen maid, a woman whose reputation could be destroyed by a single whispered rumor. But love, I discovered, is not easily contained by the walls that society builds around it. We continued our walks in the garden, our conversations in the library, our quiet moments stolen from the endless demands of household and estate. But now there was something different between us, something charged and electric that made my heart race whenever our eyes met across a crowded room, that made my breath catch whenever his hand brushed against mine. Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, was the first to notice. She was a woman of keen observation, trained by decades of service to see what others missed, and she saw the way Lord Sebastian looked at me, the way I looked at him. She said nothing at first, merely watched with those sharp eyes of hers. But one afternoon she cornered me in the pantry and spoke words that I will never forget. "I have served in great houses all my life, Miss Wren," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I have seen lords and ladies come and go, have witnessed scandals that would make your hair turn white. And I have learned that there are two kinds of men in this world: those who see servants as tools to be used and discarded, and those who see them as people to be respected." She paused, her eyes searching my face. "Lord Sebastian is the second kind. He always has been, and I believe he truly cares for you, not as a plaything or a diversion, but as a woman worthy of his regard." I did not know what to say. I had not expected such frankness from the housekeeper, had not expected anyone to acknowledge what was happening between Sebastian and me. But Mrs. Crawford was not finished. "The world will not be kind to you," she continued. "Society will tear you apart, will call you names that I will not repeat, will do everything in its power to destroy what you have found. You must be prepared for that. You must be strong." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "But if you love him, truly love him, then do not let them win. Do not let fear steal what could be the greatest happiness of your life." I thought about her words for days afterward, turning them over in my mind like stones in a tumbler. She was right, of course. The path before us was strewn with obstacles, lined with people who would seek to tear us apart. The scandal would be immense, the condemnation would be swift and merciless. But when I looked at Sebastian, when I saw the love shining in his storm-colored eyes, I knew that I did not care. Let them talk, let them condemn, let them do their worst. I had spent my entire life being invisible, being nothing, being no one. I would not let their judgment take from me the first real happiness I had ever known. It was Sebastian who finally proposed on a spring evening so beautiful it seemed designed by Providence itself. The gardens were in full bloom, the air heavy with the scent of roses and lilac, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold as the sun sank slowly toward the horizon. He took me to the gazebo at the far end of the garden, a small structure of white-painted wood that overlooked a pond where swans glided serenely through the gathering dusk. He had prepared everything: candles flickering in glass holders, a blanket spread on the wooden floor, a bottle of wine that I later learned had been laid down in the year of his birth. "Beatrice," he said, and his voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "I have rehearsed this speech 100 times, have practiced the words until they lost all meaning. But now that you are here, now that I am looking into your eyes, I find that all my eloquence has deserted me." He knelt before me, and my heart stopped. Simply stopped, as if the mechanism that kept it beating had suddenly forgotten how to function. "I love you," he said. "I love you in a way I did not know was possible. I love the way you laugh, the way you see the world, the way you ran into a burning building to save a creature that showed you kindness. I love your strength and your courage and your tender heart. I love everything about you, Beatrice Wren, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning to love you even more." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, its velvet surface worn smooth by age. Inside, nestled on a bed of white silk, was a ring. Not the grand, ostentatious sort of ring that men of his station typically gave to their brides, but something simpler, more beautiful. A band of gold set with a single sapphire, its deep blue catching the candlelight like captured sky. "This ring belonged to my mother," he said. "She wore it every day of her married life, and when she died, she asked me to give it to the woman I loved. I have been waiting for you, Beatrice. I did not know it until I saw you emerge from that fire with Wellington in your arms, but I have been waiting for you my entire life." He looked up at me, his eyes bright with hope and fear and a love so vast it seemed to encompass the entire world. "Will you marry me?" I did not hesitate. I did not think about society or scandal or the 1,000 obstacles that lay between us and happiness. I simply said yes, and the word felt like a door opening, like a light breaking through clouds, like the first breath of spring after a long and bitter winter. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment, for this woman, for this love. And then he kissed me, there in the gazebo with the candles flickering and the swans gliding and the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. It was the first time he had kissed me, and it was everything I had imagined and more. Tender and passionate, gentle and fierce, a promise and a declaration all at once. When we finally drew apart, breathless and trembling, he took my face in his hands and looked at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I do not care what they say," he said. "I do not care about the scandal or the gossip or the disapproval of a society that values bloodlines over hearts. I care only about you, Beatrice. I care only about us." I believed him. In that moment, with his ring on my finger and his love surrounding me like a shield, I believed that we could weather any storm, could overcome any obstacle, could build a life together that would defy all the odds stacked against us. I was right, and I was wrong. The truth, as it so often does, lay somewhere in between. The wedding itself was a small affair, smaller even than I had expected. Sebastian had wanted to invite more guests, had wanted to celebrate our union with all the pomp and circumstance that his station demanded. But I had asked him for something simpler, something more intimate, and he had agreed without hesitation. We were married in June in the small chapel at Thornwood Hall, with only a handful of witnesses present. There was no grand society wedding, no announcement in the papers, no elaborate ceremony designed to impress. There was only Sebastian and me, and the vows we spoke to each other, and Wellington, who lay at our feet throughout the service, his gray head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed in contentment. The scandal, of course, was magnificent. An earl marrying a kitchen maid. The gossip columns feasted on the news for weeks, dissecting our union from every possible angle, speculating about the reasons behind such a misalliance, predicting the inevitable collapse of a marriage founded on such unequal footing. I would be lying if I said it did not hurt. There were days when the whispers and the stares and the pointed silences seemed unbearable, when I wanted to retreat into the safety of the kitchens where I belonged, where no one expected anything of me except clean pots and peeled vegetables. But Sebastian never wavered. He stood beside me through every snub, every cut, every deliberate insult, delivered with a smile. He introduced me to his friends as his wife, his partner, his equal, and dared anyone to challenge him. He loved me openly, fiercely, without shame. And gradually, slowly, the world began to accept what it could not change. Or perhaps it simply moved on to fresher scandals. Either way, by the time autumn arrived, the Countess of Thornwood was no longer the most interesting topic of conversation in London drawing rooms, and I was able to breathe again. The years that followed were not perfect. No life is perfect. There were disagreements and disappointments, moments when the difference in our backgrounds seemed an insurmountable gulf, times when I felt inadequate to the role I had assumed, unworthy of the title I now bore. I remember the first time I attended a society ball as the Countess of Thornwood. It was 3 months after our wedding, and Sebastian had insisted that we could not hide forever, that we needed to face the world and stake our claim to our place in it. I was terrified. I had spent my entire adult life serving at such events, hovering in the shadows with trays of champagne and canapes, invisible to the glittering guests who swept past me without a glance. Now I was expected to be one of those guests, to hold my head high and pretend that I belonged among them. Sebastian had hired a tutor, a patient woman named Miss Pemberton, who had spent 6 weeks teaching me the intricacies of polite society, how to curtsy, how to address nobility of various ranks, which fork to use for which course, how to dance the quadrille and the waltz. I had absorbed it all with the desperate determination of a drowning woman clutching at a rope. But as the carriage drew up to the grand house where the ball was being held, I felt all of my carefully acquired knowledge drain away like water through a sieve. "They will hate me," I whispered to Sebastian, my hand gripping his so tightly my knuckles turned white. "They will look at me and see a kitchen maid playing dress-up, a fraud, an imposter." He turned to face me, his expression serious but kind. "Let them look," he said. "Let them see whatever they wish to see. But know this, Beatrice. You are not a fraud. You are not an imposter. You are my wife, the Countess of Thornwood, and you have more courage in your little finger than most of those people have in their entire bodies." He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it, his eyes never leaving mine. "You ran into a burning building to save a dog. You faced down a duke with nothing but your words and your convictions. You have already proven yourself braver than anyone in that ballroom. This is just a party, my love. Compared to what you have already survived, it is nothing." I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. But as we entered the ballroom, as hundreds of eyes turned toward us, as the whispers began to spread like wildfire through the crowd, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. The evening that followed was one of the most difficult I have ever endured. There were the cuts direct, the turned backs, the conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. There were the whispered comments, just loud enough for me to hear, about kitchen maids and fortune hunters, and the desperate measures aging widowers would take to secure a young bride. There were the cold smiles and the calculating glances, the assessments and the judgments, and the 1,000 tiny cruelties that polite society inflicts on those it deems unworthy. But there were also small kindnesses, moments of unexpected grace that I have never forgotten. A dowager countess, ancient and imperious, who had known Sebastian's mother and who took my arm and paraded me around the room, introducing me to everyone she knew as the bravest woman in England. A young wife, barely older than I was, who had married above her station herself, and who slipped me a card with her address, whispering that I should call on her if I ever needed a friend who understood. A group of military officers, friends of Sebastian's, who surrounded me and told stories of the fire, praising my courage in terms so extravagant that I blushed crimson. And through it all, Sebastian was there, dancing with me when no one else would, standing beside me when the whispers grew too loud, loving me openly and fiercely in the face of everything society could throw at us. I survived that first ball. I survived the ones that followed, each a little easier than the last. I learned to hold my head high, to meet sneers with smiles, to respond to cruelty with grace. I learned that the opinions of strangers mattered far less than I had believed, that their approval was not worth seeking, that their disapproval could not touch me unless I allowed it to. And gradually, slowly, the tide began to turn. The initial scandal faded into the background, replaced by fresher gossip about fresher transgressions. People grew accustomed to seeing me on Sebastian's arm, grew tired of whispering about a marriage that refused to fail. Some even began to admire me, to see in my story something romantic rather than scandalous, something inspiring rather than shameful. But there was also joy. Joy in the quiet mornings when Sebastian and I would walk together through the gardens, Wellington hobbling along behind us. Joy in the evenings spent in the library, reading aloud to each other while the fire crackled in the hearth. Joy in the knowledge that I was seen, that I was known, that I was loved for exactly who I was. There were moments of such perfect happiness that I had to pinch myself to make sure I was not dreaming. Lazy Sunday afternoons spent in the garden, Sebastian reading while I tended the roses that had become my passion. Rainy evenings by the fire, Wellington snoring at our feet while we played chess or cards or simply sat in companionable silence. Morning rides through the countryside. Sebastian teaching me to sit a horse properly, laughing at my initial clumsiness and praising my growing confidence. I learned to read and write in those years, properly read and write, not just the basic literacy I had acquired as a child. Sebastian tutored me himself at first, patient and encouraging, and later hired a governess to continue my education. I devoured books with the hunger of a starving woman at a feast, reading everything I could get my hands on, novels and poetry, history and philosophy, science and art. The library at Thornwood Hall, which had once seemed so intimidating, became my sanctuary, my escape, my window into worlds I had never imagined. I learned to manage a household, to oversee the army of servants who kept Thornwood Hall running smoothly. Mrs. Crawford, who had encouraged me all those months ago, became my mentor and guide, teaching me the 1,000 small details that separated a well-run house from chaos. It was strange at first to give orders to people who had so recently been my peers, but I tried to lead with kindness, to treat everyone with the respect I had so rarely received in my years of service, and gradually I earned their loyalty and their trust. I learned to be a wife in all the ways that mattered, to support Sebastian when his spirits flagged, to celebrate his triumphs and comfort him in his disappointments, to build a life with him, brick by brick, day by day, a life filled with laughter and love and the quiet contentment of two hearts that beat in perfect harmony. And through all of it, Wellington was there. My faithful friend, my bridge between worlds, the creature who had brought Sebastian and me together and who continued to be a source of joy and comfort in our daily lives. Wellington lived for 3 more years, years that I treasure as among the happiest of my life. He was old and tired, his joints stiff with age, his muzzle almost entirely white by the end. But he was loved and he was cared for. And when he finally slipped away one peaceful autumn night, he went with his head in my lap and my tears in his fur and the knowledge that he had been the bridge that led me to everything I had ever wanted. The night he died, I sat with him for hours, talking to him as I had talked to him in the kitchen of Ashworth Manor all those years ago. I told him about my life, about the journey that had led me from invisible servant to beloved wife. I thanked him for seeing me when no one else did, for being my friend when I had no one, for leading me, in his own quiet way, to the love of my life. Sebastian found us there in the small hours of the morning, Wellington still and peaceful in my arms, my tears falling silently into his gray fur. He did not speak, did not try to comfort me with words that would have been inadequate to the moment. He simply knelt beside us and wrapped his arms around us both, holding us as the night grew darker and the candles burned down to their sockets. We buried Wellington in the garden at Thornwood Hall, beneath the roses that had been Lady Margaret's pride. Sebastian held my hand as we lowered him into the ground, and together we said goodbye to the creature who had changed our lives in ways neither of us could have predicted. I planted a rose bush on his grave, a climbing variety with flowers the color of fresh cream. It grew strong and tall over the years, its blossoms filling the air with a fragrance that always made me think of him, of evenings by the kitchen fire, of the unconditional love that exists between a lonely woman and a faithful dog. Sometimes, even now, I think I see him. A flash of gray fur at the corner of my vision, a thump of an old tail against the floor, the sensation of a warm body pressing against my legs as I sit by the fire. Perhaps it is only memory, only the echoes of a love that transcended the boundaries between species. Or perhaps it is something more, some part of Wellington that lingers still, watching over me as I once watched over him. The years after Wellington's death were quieter, more contemplative. Sebastian and I grew closer still, bound by shared grief and shared memories, by the knowledge that we had walked through fire together, literally and figuratively, and emerged stronger for it. We traveled, something I had never imagined doing in my years of service. We visited Italy, where Sebastian showed me the art and architecture he had studied as a young man. We went to France, to Switzerland, to the ancient ruins of Greece and the bustling markets of Constantinople. Each journey expanded my world, showed me wonders I had never dreamed of, reminded me how much larger life was than the small corners I had known. But always, always, we returned to Thornwood Hall. It had become my home, truly my home, in a way that Ashworth Manor never had been. Every room held memories. Every garden path had witnessed our conversations. Every stone seemed to echo with the love we had built within its walls. The Duke of Ashworth wrote to us occasionally from his exile abroad. His letters were brief, formal, but they carried hints of a healing I had not thought possible. He had found peace, he said, in the hills of Tuscany, in the simplicity of a life stripped of the expectations and obligations that had once defined him. He had learned to paint, to garden, to sit in quiet contemplation without the restless need to accumulate more wealth, more power, more of everything that had proven so hollow in the end. He never returned to England. He died in Florence some 10 years after his departure, peacefully in his sleep. His distant cousin inherited Ashworth Manor, as he had decreed, and filled it with a wife and sons and daughters and all the life that the Duke himself had never been able to provide. I visited once, shortly after the Duke's death, wanting to see the place that had been my home for so many years. The manor was unrecognizable, transformed by the fire and the reconstruction into something that bore little resemblance to the cold, silent halls I remembered. Laughter echoed through the corridors, and voices rang out from the gardens, and I realized that the Ashworth Manor of my memory was gone, buried as surely as Wellington beneath the roses at Thornwood Hall. I did not mourn it. How could I mourn a place where I had been invisible, where I had spent 10 years as a ghost, unseen and unknown? The new Ashworth Manor was better, I thought. It was alive. And that was more than the old manor had ever been. Sebastian and I grew old together, as we had promised each other we would. We weathered illnesses and losses, the death of friends and the changing of seasons, the inevitable march of time that spares no one, not even those who love as fiercely as we did. The years passed like pages turning in a beloved book, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, its own lessons and revelations. We watched the world change around us, saw the old ways give way to new, witnessed the beginning of an age of machines and progress that our younger selves could never have imagined. Through it all, our love remained constant, It had deepened over the years, had grown roots so strong that nothing could shake them. What had begun as a spark in the ashes of a burning manor had become a steady flame, warming us through the cold winters of age, illuminating the darker moments with its gentle light. Sebastian grew frailer as the years passed, his once strong body yielding slowly to the ravages of time. I watched him fade, watched the man I loved grow thin and tired, watched his storm-colored eyes grow dimmer even as the love in them burned as bright as ever. We spent his last months in the library, surrounded by his books, surrounded by the memories we had made together. I read to him when his eyes grew too tired, held his hand when the pain became too much, loved him with every breath in my body, even as I felt him slipping away from me. He died on a spring morning, with birdsong drifting through the open windows and sunlight streaming across the bed where he lay. I was holding his hand, as I had held it so many times before, and I felt the moment when his spirit departed, felt the subtle shift in the room that told me I was now alone. His last words were of love. They were always of love, with Sebastian. He told me that meeting me had been the greatest blessing of his life, that our years together had brought him more happiness than he had ever deserved, that he would wait for me on the other side of whatever veil separates this world from the next. I told him I loved him. I told him I would find him again. I told him that he had saved me, that night by the burning manor, had saved not just my body from the flames, but my soul from the loneliness and invisibility that had been consuming me. I told him that because of him, I knew what it meant to be truly seen, truly known, truly loved. And then he was gone, and I was alone in a way I had not been alone since before the fire. I thought I would be destroyed by his loss, as my father had been destroyed by my mother's. I thought the grief would consume me, would swallow me whole and leave nothing behind but an empty shell. But I was wrong. I grieved, of course. I grieved deeply, profoundly, with an intensity that surprised even me. There were days when I could not rise from my bed, days when the weight of his absence pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. There were nights when I reached for him in my sleep and woke to the devastating emptiness of the space beside me. But I was not destroyed. I was not emptied. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of seeing beauty in the world, even through the tears that blurred my vision. Because Sebastian had given me something more precious than happiness. He had given me the knowledge that I was worthy of love. He had shown me that I was not invisible, that I mattered, that my life had value and meaning beyond the work of my hands, and that knowledge, once given, could not be taken away, not by death, not by grief, not by anything. I found comfort in unexpected places in the months after his passing. In the garden, where the roses he had helped me plant still bloomed each spring. In the library, where his books still lined the shelves and his presence seemed to linger in every shadow. In the letters I received from friends and strangers alike, people who had heard our story and wanted to tell me how it had inspired them, how it had given them hope that love could triumph over every obstacle. And I found comfort in memory, in the thousands of small moments we had shared over the years. The way he smiled when he saw me across a crowded room, the sound of his laughter, rich and warm and full of joy, the feel of his hand in mine, steady and strong and always there when I needed it. These memories became my treasures, more precious than any gold the Duke had saved from the fire. They were proof that we had lived, that we had loved, that what we had built together had been real and true and worth every struggle we had endured to claim it. I am old now, older than I ever thought I would be. My hair has gone silver, my hands have grown spotted and weak, my back aches with every step. I spend my days in the library at Thornwood Hall, surrounded by Sebastian's books, with a fire crackling in the hearth and memories crowding close. The servants still call me my lady, still treat me with the deference due to a countess, but I have never forgotten where I came from. I have never forgotten the kitchen maid I once was, the invisible woman who scrubbed pots and dreamed of something more. That woman is still inside me, still marveling at the life I have lived, still grateful beyond words for every blessing I have received. I have made it my mission in these twilight years to be kind to those who serve. I know their names, all of them, know their families and their dreams and their struggles. I remember what it was like to be unseen, and I make certain that no one who works in my household ever feels that way. It is, perhaps, the most important legacy I can leave behind. Visitors still come to Thornwood Hall occasionally, curious about the woman who ran into a burning building to save a dog and married an earl for her trouble. They expect to find someone extraordinary, someone larger than life, a heroine from a romantic novel. What they find instead is an old woman with silver hair and kind eyes, a woman who speaks of love and courage and the importance of seeing the people around us, truly seeing them, not as servants or masters, as rich or poor, but as fellow human beings deserving of respect and compassion. I tell them my story when they ask, this story I am telling now, and I watch their faces as they listen. Some are moved to tears. Others are skeptical, unable to believe that such things could happen in the real world, that love could truly triumph over class and circumstance, and the weight of society's expectations. A few, the ones who have known love themselves, simply nod, recognizing in my words an echo of their own experiences, their own journeys from loneliness to connection. Sometimes, when the light falls at just the right angle, I think I see him. A tall figure by the window, silhouetted against the gray winter light. A smile that seems to illuminate the entire room. Storm-colored eyes full of a love that death could not diminish. And sometimes, curled at my feet, I feel the weight of a warm body, the thump of an old tale, the gentle presence of a friend who crossed the bridge between worlds to bring me home. I do not know how much longer I have. The doctors speak in careful terms, hedging their predictions with qualifications and uncertainties, but I can feel the truth in my bones. My time is drawing to a close. The fire that has burned within me all these years is guttering low, and soon, very soon, it will flicker out entirely. I am not afraid. I have had a life beyond my wildest imaginings, have loved and been loved in return, have experienced joys that the kitchen maid I once was could never have conceived of. I have no regrets, no unfinished business, no words left unsaid. And when I close my eyes for the last time, I know what I will see. I will see Sebastian, waiting for me on the other side, his hand outstretched, his smile as beautiful as it was on the day he first told me he loved me. I will see Wellington, young and strong again, bounding toward me with his tail wagging and his eyes full of joy. I will see my parents, my mother with her bell-like laugh, and my father with his gentle hands welcoming their daughter home at last. I will see everyone I have ever loved, gathered together in a place where fire cannot burn and loss cannot touch, where love is eternal and no one is ever invisible again. I have lived a life I never dared to imagine, a life built on the ashes of a burning manor and the courage of a woman who ran back inside for an old dog. I have known love and loss, joy and sorrow, all the heights and depths of human experience. And if I could go back, if I could stand once more in the snow on that winter night, watching the flames consume everything I knew, I would not change a thing. Not the terror, not the smoke, not the choice that led me into the fire and out again, into the arms of a man who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself. Because that is what the fire taught me, the lesson that took me a lifetime to truly understand. It is not the gold that matters, not the wealth or the status or the possessions that we cling to so desperately. What matters is what we are willing to run into the flames to save. What matters is the love that survives when everything else has turned to ash. I know what I was willing to save. I know what saved me in return. And that knowledge is worth more than all the gold in the world. The fire is burning low now, the embers glowing softly in the gathering dark. Outside, the first stars are appearing in the winter sky, cold and bright and impossibly distant. I close my eyes and let the warmth wash over me. Let the memories rise and fall like the flames themselves, dancing, flickering, alive. I am Beatrice Wren, Countess of Thornwood. I was a kitchen maid, invisible and alone. I was a woman who ran into a burning building to save a dog. I was loved, truly and deeply loved, by a man who saw me when no one else did. And this is my story, told at last, written in fire and ash and the gentle light of stars. This is how it ends. This is how it begins again. Every time the fire burns low, every time I close my eyes and remember. The manor caught fire. The Duke saved his gold, and I, a simple maid with nothing to my name but a brave and foolish heart, ran back inside for his dog. And in doing so, I found everything I never knew I was looking for. Everything I never knew I deserved. Everything.